So I don't know if you've been following the news in Hawaii on what's been happening with the nurses at Kapiolani Medical Center, but there's some beef going on between them and the hospital, and things aren't really looking so good.
The union, representing some 600 nurses, is vowing to keep fighting after management refused to allow them back to work after a one-day walkout.
This is battle. Understand that. Through this time that we go through this lockout, we will be together. We will hold each other up.
So I want to share my opinion as someone on the sidelines watching all of this unfold, because this is a very unusual situation, at least for Hawaii standards. Most of the time there's sign waving, people honk their horns as they drive by, and then negotiations resolve themselves and everyone goes back to work. But the thing is not this time. And you better believe those big employers and unions, they're taking notes. Okay, so just for a little background on the situation, if you're not familiar with it. About 600 nurses at Kapiolani, represented by the Hawaii Nurses Association, decided to hold a sign waving demonstration. That's an important word, demonstration, on Friday, September 13th. Kapiolani then told them that any nurses who do that won't be allowed back to work. And so in the days leading up to that Friday, they continued negotiations, but they couldn't reach an agreement. So Kapiolani kept their word, and after those nurses had that demonstration on Friday, they were essentially locked out. Meanwhile, Kapiolani has brought in temporary nurses while this situation is being settled. And just some minor details, the nurses are being offered a wage schedule that would increase their wages to between $130,000 and $160,000 in 3 years for a 3-day, 12 hours a day work week. Just speaking as somebody who just works here, I'm like, that's pretty good money. But I think the real sticking point for the union is not pay, but actually the working conditions, particularly the nurse to patient ratios. And so until the union agrees with the hospital, the nurses aren't allowed back to work, and their insurance benefits will end by the end of September. So now my just general observations about this whole thing happening, and I have 3 of them. So the first thing is, I think this is the first time I remember when an employer has exercised this lockout tactic. I cannot recall another time when union members were locked out of the workplace until they agreed to the offer made by an employer. And I'm thinking back to like the teachers, like when they went on strike when I was back in high school, or when the longshoremen, have to go through negotiations and everybody gets all tense, and people start going to Costco and start buying, 6 toilet paper bundles and 2 generators. And even the recent hotel workers, I don't recall a time when there was even talks of there being a lockout. Maybe I'm too young for that, but in keeping up with local politics for the past, I don't know, maybe 15 years, I can't recall a single time that that's happened. And so in this situation, the employer, being Kapiolani Medical Center, seems like they kind of called the union's bluff, and they kind of just put their foot down on this situation. And thinking about this, it kind of reminds me of when a parent is fighting with their teen, or teen fighting with their parent. And maybe you remember these times when, you were a small kid, or if you got teens, you are going through it right now. But I remember when I was growing up, I sometimes got into it with my parent. For the most part, I would listen to them, but there were a few occasions where they had to bring out the hardball tactics and actually make good on their threats to taking things away, because I never listen. Now, back when I was growing up, we used to have so many fights about cleaning the bathroom. I hated cleaning the bathroom every week, and it had to be every week because that's what my mom said. You gotta clean the bathroom every week. Now, granted, it was the bathroom for me and my brother, so we were the ones that made all the mess. But still, I'm a young kid. I hated cleaning the bathroom because I had to do it my mom's way. I mean, if it was up to me, I'd just, roll up some toilet paper and just kind of, wipe stuff down, look good, and then, all done real fast. But my mom, she wanted it to be done her way, which meant I had to not only take everything out of the bathroom, wipe everything down with the Pine Sol, and I had to mop the floor. Oh gosh, I used to hate that. She wanted me to do it her way. I never had cell phones back then, but the pressure points for me at the time were TV and video games, especially video games. I could play that all afternoon. And so when my mom had to play some hardball tactics on me, basically it was no TV and no video games until I cleaned the bathroom the way that my mom wanted, and she had to inspect it after just to make sure, and then it was okay. And the thing is, at first, I can handle, I just eat snacks or, I go play with my other toys. But after a while, you kind of start feeling that pressure, right? Like you start looking at the clock and you're thinking, bruh, how can that only be 5 minutes? And so what would happen is I would cave and clean the bathroom the way my mom wanted, and then I could go watch TV and play video games again. Now, not to belittle this whole situation with the nurses to that of a family dispute, but I do think that there are similarities in terms of the power difference between an employer and an employee. And this is not going to be a Karl Marx discussion, but still, I think we can see that someone is going to have to give in. And it's going to be the nurses in this case. I mean, of course, the public supports nurses. Speaking as someone who had 2 kids at Kaiser, I am so grateful for those Kaiser nurses, particularly the ones that work in the maternity ward, because they were there and they were so helpful to a new dad and a new mom. I made a video about how great those Kaiser nurses were. They're just outstanding. But now that Kapiolani has taken a very strong position, it's really up to the nurses to see how they're going to react. I mean, really, they're in control. The ball is in their court. And in most situations, I think that's actually a great thing, right? Because you feel like you are in control, that you have the power. But the way that it's being played out, at least from afar, and what I'm seeing is that they actually don't want the ball, I think. Like, I think having that control, you put yourself in a very vulnerable position, which is kind of unusual. And I think as time goes on, the union will start to feel that growing sense of isolation as the days pass and as individual members' breaking points start to be reached. I think that if they can stay together as a union, that's wonderful. But with things being as expensive as they are, and once the insurance runs out in a couple of weeks, I think the pressure from within the union is going to be extremely strong. And at that point, I think we'll have to see what exactly they're going to do, because if their own members are starting to complain and get restless, well, then they're going to be forced to act. Now, the second observation is, I think this is an opportunity for us to take a closer look at what a union actually does when times get hard. So this is what you pay all those union dues for, the ones you pay every month. It's for moments like this. And as far as the union members are concerned, I think it's important to see how the union reps and leadership will react under hard times. I mean, it's all good, right? When the negotiations are good and you get what you want, pay increase, everybody is happy. But I think it's important to also see how union leaders react and handle situations when negotiations are at a standstill. When you think back to Hawaii's long history of unions, going back to plantation times, I mean, unions are a part of the local landscape, whether it's political, whether it comes to elections. I mean, these days, the unions in Hawaii they're pretty powerful, just pointing it out there. And the thing is, for most union members, I would just assume that as long as they're getting paid and, things are generally good, it's all good, right? They really don't mess around with too much union work. But with this lockout situation being kind of difficult and they're getting kind of, hard rubs, here and there, I think it'll be very interesting to see how the union leadership reacts. Now, obviously, I'm no expert at labor relations, but as a armchair quarterback here, I would have hired outside counsel as soon as the hospital gave word of the lockout. It wasn't like the lockout was a surprise. I think that's an important factor to remember here, is they got notice that if they did the demonstration, there would be a lockout. So it's not like they was caught by surprise, come Saturday, come Monday morning, they kind of go back to work. But as soon as they got word of that from the hospital, I would have reached out to outside help, because if we couldn't, I'm thinking as the union, if we couldn't come to some sort of agreement from the resources that we have, then we really need somebody else, because getting those nurses back to work, I think, is very important, not just for themselves and their families, but also, of course, for the patients who need healthcare. And so for a bigger situation like this, I think it would have been better to have outside perspective and expertise. And there's still time. It's not too late to bring in outside expertise to help mediate or to help the negotiations along. And I think, at least through the news, the hospital is willing to have those late night negotiations. But if the union is either not willing, or just maybe not capable, or just not familiar with the situation that they're currently in now, which again, I haven't seen this in recent times, then maybe it's time to bring in somebody else. Okay, and the third thing is reconciliation and the return to work. I think after going through something like this, where you have the hospital administration seemingly against the nurses, how do you recover from something like that in the workplace? And you're just supposed to return to work and everybody just gets along. I hope that Kapiolani is really thinking about when these nurses come back. I mean, 600 is kind of a lot, and they're gonna have to work together for the upcoming years. But how are they gonna all work together? And I don't know how you do that. I mean, gonna have small kind hurt feelings, right? I mean, it's gonna be rough, especially if this continues past September. You know, it's gonna be rough to kind of get back to work. So I hope that the hospital is thinking about what they're gonna do to maybe bring everybody together. You can write it off as team building exercise, but maybe just, you know, some kind of lunch, just some kind of appreciation to show that, okay, you have the admin and then maybe union leaders, and maybe they can just sit together, talk story at this huge, maybe like some kind of lunch or some kind of food thing, and they can give like quick speeches, just so it kind of starts to bridge those relationships again. Because I'm just thinking, if we're fighting for these guys for 3 weeks and we had to give in, we kind of feel like kind of small shame, right? We got to come back to work, and maybe you feel like they're just gloating and, you know, they're smiling, ha ha ha, you know, like that kind. You're gonna need something, I think, some kind of event or some kind of, you know, recurring events to kind of build that trust and those relationships back, because man, it's gonna be hard to go back to work. And on a side note, if I'm Queens or if I'm Kaiser, boy, I would start to beef up some of that recruitment, because if some of those nurses are not happy to go back to work, you're gonna have a whole bunch of nurses here in Hawaii that could use employment, and they might look at places like Queens and Kaiser. And so if I'm those hospitals, I'm thinking, okay, let's start reaching out and seeing if we can fill up a lot of pukas and holes that we got in our staffing need. And so I'm gonna continue to watch what happens with all of this, because I'm seeing it more than just how it impacts the local nurse workforce, particularly Kapiolani and maybe to other nurse unions or other staff. I think this is going to impact a lot of the other industries in Hawaii, the other unions, because people are watching what happens. Again, I've never seen like a lockout situation like this before. Again, perhaps I'm wrong, and someone in the comments can correct me. They remember a previous time. But I don't remember a lockout situation like this. And so does this now set a precedent for other employers to say, you know what, that's all we're gonna give you. If you don't like it, we're in the lockout, right? Like, is that gonna be a common practice here in Hawaii? Which again, I don't remember it being like that. And if that's the case, it's gonna be tough for some other unions and some other employers when they have to go to the bargaining table to negotiate. And it may not be as friendly. You know, there are certain industries in Hawaii, like I mentioned, the longshoremen, that, you know, they have a very strong position here in Hawaii because of, you know, everything has to be shipped here. They have a very strong position. But there are also other unions that I'm not sure their position is quite as strong. And so if they are temporarily replaceable, if employers start playing hardball with some of the unions, what is that going to mean? I don't know what that's going to mean, but I think it's very interesting as we watch this situation unfold. And who knows, maybe it'll get resolved real fast. Everybody can go back to being friends, but with how it's being played out in the news, I'm not so sure. So I'd love to hear what people think about what's going on now with some of the local nurses in Hawaii. And I don't know how it's going to end up, but I am very curious to find out. So thanks for watching, and aloha.
Hello.